Hello everyone, this is Dalster and welcome to another music topics video. And in this video, I will go over the Whitney documentary that came out in 2018. I think this is the documentary that I have wanted to see since they announced it in theaters. Just to give a quick story on how I knew about Whitney Houston was through a show that they showed on VH1 called 100 Greatest Songs of the 90s. Her cover song for I Will Always Love You by Dolly Parton was in the top 20, and it's one of my favorite songs of Whitney's actually. Since then, I have always been a fan of Whitney's music and love her songs, most notably I Will Always Love You, Saving All My Love, Greatest Love of All, and I Wanna Dance with Somebody. For some reason, whenever it's February, it kind of reminds me of Whitney Houston in a way. I don't know if it's because of Black History Month or a woman who sings romantic songs, since it's almost Valentine's Day. It was really sad when she passed away, but what made it even more sad was how her only child, Bobby Christina, also died not that long ago, and died almost the same way as her mom. I also watched the movie I Wanna Dance with Somebody and did a movie review for it if you guys want to check that out. First, I'll go over the documentary and share my thoughts at the end. Before she became one of the greatest female singers of all time, Whitney lived in Newark, New Jersey. When she was born, her Aunt Bay, who is a family friend, said in the documentary that Whitney's father, John, thought that Whitney looked unreal and so beautiful as a baby. During her childhood in the 60s, Newark was going through hard times as riots were going on. The Newark riots in the 60s happened because the police arrested and beat up a local cab driver named John William Smith, causing the black community to get angry because of the treatment that they were receiving from the police. It happened on July 12, 1967, and lasted for 6 days as the city was severely destroyed, as seen through archived clips in this documentary, with buildings being burnt to the ground. There were 26 deaths, and as Whitney recalled from a previous audio interview, she remembered this event as she was 3 years old, about to turn 4 back then, and also remembered lying on the floor and eating her food while sitting on it. Her brother Michael described Whitney as a sassy, smart-mouthed girl who used to follow him around as kids and had a close sibling bond. When she and her siblings were growing up, Whitney would come home messy. Whitney's mother, Sissy, was a backup singer for Aretha Franklin, Elvis Presley, and many other singers. While Sissy was out on the road singing in order to provide for the family, Whitney and her siblings would stay with 4 to 5 families in order to be taken care of. It was not easy for her, as this documentary mentioned that Whitney and her brother, Gary, were allegedly SA'd by their aunt Dee Dee Warwick, sister of the singer Dionne Warwick. It was stated in the documentary that Whitney being molested made her question her sexual preference. In the documentary, one of her friends mentioned that Whitney had told her that she was SA'd as a child but never told Sissy about it. Sissy in the documentary thinks that it is not true, as well as Dionne, who in an interview that I saw on YouTube said that she does not believe that Dee Dee would do something like that. Dionne and Dee Dee Warwick were the cousins of Whitney and nieces of Sissy. Whitney wanted to be a singer when she was 13, as she was influenced by the gospel music that she heard at the church. She would then sing gospel and would lead the church choir, as seen through archived clips. Sissy was a directress for the church and said that Whitney was a good girl in the beginning. Growing up as a child, Whitney had lighter skin than the rest of the people in her neighborhood and would get picked on for it, making her a shy person. Even the girls at the church would tease her, but also be jealous of her because of how good she sang at the church. The family eventually moved out of Newark and into a house, as they wanted to be seen as a middle class instead of being known as a poor family. While she had her singing career, Sissy released her first album, but it did not become successful. Sissy taught Whitney how to sing, as she advised Whitney to sing from her heart, mind, and guts. She was very disciplined to Whitney on her voice training, to the point where Whitney and Sissy would come home angry as they would have arguments. After the family moved out of Newark, Whitney was transferred to Mount St. Academy, which is a private Catholic school for girls, because Whitney's parents wanted her to get away from the bullying and be safe. Whitney was nicknamed Nippy, as the people interviewed for this documentary would sometimes refer to Whitney as Nippy. John and Sissy eventually divorced due to infidelity, as Sissy cheated on John with a church minister, which caused John to get jealous. It bothered Whitney and her brothers, as it caused her to move out of the house, angry. In order to provide for herself, Whitney began to do modeling. Afterwards, Whitney did background singing for her mom's shows. One of Whitney's brothers said in the documentary that they think that Sissy groomed Whitney. One possible example would be Sissy lying to Whitney that her throat was not working, as they had a show in a place called Michael's. Sissy had told Whitney to sing her verse, which she did, as seen in an old clip, as Whitney sang great and loud to the audience at the club, as they applauded for her high-pitched, beautiful voice. She then got a deal with Elektra Records and would start working with Clive Davis, as he liked hearing Whitney sing Greatest Love of All. Afterwards, Whitney made her first television appearance in 1983 and sang her heart out to the song Home. Whitney's career would skyrocket as her songs were hitting #1 on the Billboard charts, and her debut album would become a success. At the age of 21, Whitney was a big star in the music industry, as people would call her the new queen of pop. Her music would be all over the media, such as a McDonald's commercial and a Pepsi commercial. With fame came the scandals, as Whitney was becoming successful. There were stories or rumors that Whitney was dating Eddie Murphy, followed by NFL quarterback at the time, Randall Cunningham, as well as having an affair with a mystery man. Whitney's hairstylist mentioned in the documentary that Whitney loved sex, and actually bought a vibrator for Whitney. There was a story that actor Robert De Niro was stalking Whitney at one point and was rumored to almost marry a man named Brad Johnson. Whitney then had her friend Robin Crawford become her bodyguard and her creative manager, as they were very close friends. She met Robin when she was 16 at a summer job. One person interviewed for this documentary said that Whitney had told them that Robin had a beautiful afro. At 18, Whitney left her parents' home and moved in with Robin. Gary Garland Houston, one of Whitney's brothers, said in the documentary that Robin was a nobody, a wannabe, and an opportunist. Whitney's family were uncomfortable with Robin because she is a lesbian. The Houston family wanted to portray themselves as a perfect family, even though the public were unaware at the time that Whitney's parents. Stories then came out that Whitney was queer, which was a problem for the Houston family. John would even try to break Whitney and Robin up, such as offering money to anyone who could break Robin's legs. Money also made John greedy and an opportunist, more so than Robin, as Gary had said about her in this documentary. At the height of Whitney's career, John would take over Whitney's financial support, which would eventually cause problems for Whitney down the line. Whitney's brother Gary was an NBA player, but was fired after failing a drug test. After the NBA, Gary became a backup singer for Whitney, which was not something he wanted to do for a career. Michael was a road tour manager for Whitney and a prankster among Whitney and her touring crew. He and Gary were also Whitney's bodyguards, but would do drugs with Whitney while she was on tour. Many people did a lot of drugs during the 80s, as Michael would do drugs in Japan, as well as smoking marijuana with Whitney. Whitney's black audience were not happy, as she went from singing to gospel music to changing her style to pop music. Even Reverend Al Sharpton protested against Whitney's music and nicknamed her Whitey. The audience would then boo Whitney at the Soul Train Awards. It was said in the documentary that Whitney was very upset by it, as the booing reminded her of being bullied at school. That same night at the Soul Train Awards, Whitney met New Edition member Bobby Brown as he sat in the front row. Bobby said back then, in the 80s, he was very conceited and troublesome. Days later, Whitney and Bobby married. It was said in the documentary that Robin had a hard time accepting Whitney and Bobby's marriage, as she was worried for Whitney's protection. Whitney thought that her life was going to be like a fairy tale when she got married. Once their daughter, Bobby Christina Brown, was born, she would spend a lot of time on the road with Whitney and Bobby than being in school. Aunt Bay mentioned in the documentary how much she loved Bobby Christina and would sleep next to her for 8 months when she was a baby. She cried as Aunt Bay recounted her memories about Bobby Christina. Whitney was then offered to sing the national anthem at the Super Bowl and wanted to do it differently. She was inspired by Marvin Gaye's performance of his version of the national anthem that he had sung at the NBA. Whitney wanted the national anthem to have a gospel sound to it, and when she sang the Star-Spangled Banner, a lot of people loved it, even the white people. Afterwards, Whitney starred in the Bodyguard movie alongside actor Kevin Costner. In the documentary, Kevin talked about his kissing scene with Whitney as it was a huge, powerful moment for the black and white communities. Afterwards, Whitney and Bobby created Brown House Productions. Although they had a production studio, their relationship was not going so well, as Bobby would do things to hurt Whitney, such as hitting her. Whitney was bothered by the press because they thought that she and Bobby would not last long. She did not want to be a divorcee like her mom was. Surprisingly, Whitney and Michael Jackson took drugs every day around that time. It was said that Michael and Whitney did not do drugs with Bobby, as Michael had said that Bobby was a lightweight when it came to drugs. When asked about Whitney's drug problems in the documentary, Bobby refused to talk about it. Whitney would mostly take cocaine and weed. With her drug problems worsening, Whitney started canceling concerts as she would get high with Bobby. When Sissy and another woman, who was also interviewed for this documentary, did an intervention on Whitney, Whitney was really stoned. Sissy did not do much to help Whitney, as she was afraid that it would ruin her relationship with Whitney even more, since Whitney had moved out at a young age due to her parents' divorce. When one of Whitney's friends, who was interviewed for this documentary, asked why she can't stop doing drugs to Whitney, Whitney had told her that she liked doing drugs and would stop when she was tired of it. In one archived clip, Whitney looked so out of it as her eye makeup was smeared all over her eyes, almost looking like an addict who was living on the streets. Bobby, though, felt very insecure about Robin being around Whitney all the time. Another archived clip that the documentary had shown was Bobby threatening Robin and telling her that he would bury her body in the yard. It was stated in the documentary that Robin felt that Bobby was a bad influence on Whitney and that he would destroy her. So Robin ended up giving Whitney an ultimatum, as Whitney had to choose between Robin and Bobby. Whitney chose Bobby, as Robin never spoke to Whitney for a very long time. After Robin was out of the picture, John gained full control of Whitney's finances. John would unfortunately steal money from Whitney, which she would cut him off when she found out about it. When Whitney signed a $100 million deal, John wanted some of that money, as he felt that it belonged to him. Unfortunately, Whitney did not go to her dad's funeral, but was able to say goodbye to him before his burial. After her father's death, Whitney began to close herself from the world. In an old clip, Whitney looked stoned as her overalls were hanging out of her body. It was said in the documentary that Whitney locked herself in a hotel room and stayed there for days, but when she finally came out, Whitney was said to be skinnier than before. Whitney had spent millions of dollars while recording her comeback album. During the time of her comeback album, Whitney's voice was going in and out. Before 9/11 had happened, Whitney did a Michael Jackson tribute, but looked very thin as the newspapers and tabloids printed that Whitney was still doing drugs. When Whitney did the Diane Sawyer interview, Diane had asked who the devil was, and Whitney said that the devil was herself. Whitney also said in that interview of the infamous crack is whack quote. The media was not friendly with Whitney, as shows like Saturday Night Live and American Dad would make fun of her. Record executive L.A. Reid was mad that people were making fun of Whitney and told them F you to those people in this documentary. Michael Jackson was said to have reached out to Whitney even if they did not talk for many hours. Afterwards, Whitney went to rehab. Pat, Whitney's sister-in-law, said that Whitney did not like it when Pat left her daughter behind. In a talk show interview, Whitney said that she hated child abuse. It's possible that Whitney was worried for her niece whenever Pat her for some time alone, as Whitney probably thought that what had happened to her could happen to her niece. Bobby Christina, though, would see her parents doing drugs and had to deal with a lot of their issues at such a young age. She would sadly end up doing drugs with her mom. In an incident that Pat recalled, Whitney had told Pat to meet her at the hospital as Bobby Christina had slashed her arms due to her hating her life and her mother. It was also stated in the documentary that Bobby Christina allegedly wanted to kill Whitney. After that, Whitney divorced Bobby. She also went to rehab for a while, as Whitney did not have enough money to stay there for 7 months. In an attempt to get back to her career, Whitney tried to do a comeback tour, but was not doing well with her singing, as her vocals would not go any higher, causing some of the audience to walk out on her shows. After the tour, she starred in a movie remake of Sparkle, as it was one of her favorite movies back in the day. Whitney needed the money as she was going broke. Around production time, Whitney started to come around as she went to sports games with some of the crew or hung out with people backstage. It seemed that the movie gave Whitney a purpose to probably live a sober life. During her last days on earth, Whitney wanted to get her act together and was said to talk about Jesus and John the Baptist. When Whitney got into the tub one day, she requested cupcakes. Once her assistant Mary went to go get Whitney's cupcakes, Whitney would then drown in the tub. Once Mary came back, she felt water on the carpet. Whitney was then seen by her assistant face down in the tub. Passed away on February 11th, 2012. In 2015, Bobby Christina was found unconscious in a bathtub, but died 6 months later at the hospital as she was in a coma. Since this documentary was released in 2018, it stated at the end that Whitney still holds the record for the most consecutive number ones in the US charts. It also stated that I Will Always Love You was the best-selling single that was ever released by a female singer. In the beginning of this documentary, we hear an audio from Whitney talking to God about why this was happening to her, and how her mom had told Whitney that the devil was coming to get her, but never did. At the end of it, Whitney sang I Have Nothing, which wows the audience. Overall, I give this documentary an 8 out of 10, as it was eye-opening and somewhat detailed, but with some missing elements. While there was some new information that I did not know until finally watching this documentary, I feel like Robin should have been included in it to give her thoughts and opinions. This documentary did make Robin look a little bad, as Gary mostly talked crap about her, and the rest of the family seemed uncomfortable talking about her connection to Whitney. Maybe Whitney was romantically involved with Robin, but I do feel like the rest of the family tried to scrap any talk of Robin. It's hard to believe what's true or not, since Whitney is no longer here with us, but I do think the family does not like Robin at all, and refuse to give credit to her. They are religious, so maybe that's why they felt a little uncomfortable talking about her. I do feel bad for Whitney and what she might have gone through, as stated in this documentary. Again, she can't speak for herself, since she is not on this earth anymore, but it's possible that being SA'd as a child along with Gary, too, could explain the drug use. Some black families have dealt with inappropriate touching within the household, as far as I have heard in other documentaries, such as R. Kelly and his brother getting molested by their aunt, and Missy Elliott being touched inappropriately by a family member. It's really sad, and it's not just black families, as it could happen to other families as well. My point with this is that inappropriate touching has a long-lasting negative effect on children, and I think with Whitney's case, I would not be surprised if this was 100% true, and could explain her never-ending drug addiction. I hope this explains my point, as sometimes people would get confused with my commentary, but I do feel so bad for Whitney and her brother Gary going through that as kids. Again, this is alleged, as Dionne Warwick has denied it being true, as well as Sissy. The media was not friendly with Whitney, as it reminded me of how they were so awful with Britney Spears and Amy Winehouse. For a black woman to be picked on by the media is such a slap to the face and so dehumanizing, especially for Whitney. It's no wonder why she had a hard time with her addiction. I'm no fan of L.A. Reid because of his allegations that I have heard of, but I do agree with him that the media were messed up for making fun of Whitney and her addiction. You wonder why people have a hard time getting over their drug addiction. It's because their trauma being played for entertainment, such as the media. I remember there was a show on VH1, and they poked fun at Whitney and Bobby for visiting Israel. They called Whitney cracktacular and said that Whitney was drugged during that trip because she kept referring to Israel as my land. It was a weird time, as nowadays you can't say stuff like that to people anymore unless you want to get canceled. Also, I was shocked that people booed at Whitney for changing her music style from gospel to pop, as the same thing happened to Bob Dylan when he went electric. I'm glad they didn't focus so much on Whitney and Bobby's relationship, as some documentaries or specials focus more on that than Whitney's career and life before stardom. Bobby was not that guy you would want to be in a relationship back in the day. I feel mostly bad for Bobby Christina because she dealt with her parents being drugged most of the time instead of them raising her and creating happy memories that probably would have helped to influence her in a positive way. Addiction is very difficult to get out of, but it takes a lot of effort to conquer it. It's still sad that Whitney is no longer here and died too soon. She was a really great singer, and there will never be one like her, ever. They recently did a movie of Whitney called I Wanna Dance with Somebody, which is based on her life if you want to check that out. It's currently available on Hulu right now, as it was on Netflix, but not anymore. But overall, this was a really great documentary, and it's worth a watch. It is kind of long though, to like around 2 hours. I'm glad to have watched it, even though it's been 7 years. Rest in peace to Whitney and Bobby Christina. You may be gone, but will never be forgotten. February 11th of this month marks 13 years that she's not here with us. Sissy also passed away last year, so I hope they're doing okay wherever they are. But anyway, this is Douster, and I'll see you guys in the next Music Topics video. Thank you guys for watching, and we are so close to 700 subscribers. And thank you guys so much from the bottom of my heart. You guys mean everything to me. But take care of your mental health and everyone around you, and I'll do the same too. Bye guys.